Joining me now, NBC News political analyst and senior national political correspondent at The Washington Post, Ashley Parker, New York Times opinion columnist David French, and Reuters White House correspondent Jeff Mason. So, Ashley, how emblematic is last night's chaos on Capitol Hill as part of the current political landscape?
It's probably on the extreme end, but it's fairly telling about a deeply polarized and, frankly, fairly incivil Congress and also our politics writ large. One thing I'm spending a lot of time thinking about now, because the Biden and the Trump campaigns are spending a lot of time thinking about it, are these quote unquote double hater, double disliker voters that dislike both Trump and Biden. It's worth noting they dislike them for specific reasons, but they also sort of dislike politics. They're disgusted with Washington. And when you look at something like what you just played, it's easy to understand why they feel this way.
Yeah, and Jeff, President Biden has asserted executive privilege. And what's his reasoning there? Because we have the transcripts. Now, it's very controversial because of Robert Hur being, critics said, very subjective in describing him as an elderly old man.
Yeah, indeed. I think actually the reasoning is what you just said, at least what the White House is saying, is that they have the transcripts. So why do you need a recording? I think the broader reasoning, which maybe they're not wanting to say out loud, is that they don't want it to become a campaign video. And even though the information that came out in that deposition is public and is clear in the transcripts and in his report, to have a recording and to have his voice going back and forth about this issue just keeps it out in the ether in a way that they'd rather not have it.
And when we talk about the recording, David, you've been writing about the divorce from reality of politics, the partisanship. You write, if you are a true partisan, you essentially become an unpaid lawyer for your side. Every good fact that bolsters your arguments is magnified. Every bad fact is minimized or rationalized. So are the campaigns overlooking the persuadable voters to their detriment and pandering to the respective echo chambers?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt that the impulse right now in American politics is to solidify your base. There is a mobilization rather than a persuasion paradigm that is dominating much of our politics. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of voters feel left behind, the people who don't necessarily feel like they fit completely and totally in one camp or the other. On the Republican side, the reach out to the persuadables is essentially abandoned except by sort of catastrophizing Joe Biden. The reach out to the persuadables is, if you don't vote for Trump, America ends, which is a extreme kind of pitch to voters that can be extremely off-putting. But if it's the only one to them, if there isn't another counter, if there isn't a counter argument made to these persuadables, sometimes even the most extreme argument can win. But we're in a position right now where both parties tend by instinct to appeal to their bases to win, as opposed to appealing more to that American middle. And it's one of the reasons we're in an incredibly dysfunctional moment.
And I wanted to ask you also about something that the New York Times broke, which is that in 2021, the Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, who was the lead on Dobbs and several other very controversial opinions, had an American flag hanging upside down outside his house. And this is a symbol associated with the Stop the Steal movement. Justice Alito today denying involvement, saying it was briefly placed by his wife in response to a neighbor's use of objectionable and personally insulting language on yard signs, close quote. Senator Durbin, now the chairman of Senate Judiciary, though, wants Justice Alito to recuse himself from cases related to 2020. It shows how politicized the court is now. We already have a refusal to recuse from Clarence Thomas, and the immunity decision hanging out there when a lot of lawyers say it should never have taken this long and it should have been simply decided quickly when Jack Smith asked for that.
Well, you know, the thing about this, it's so troubling on multiple levels. This is even different from the Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas stories, because this is their house, their flagpole. It's not just his wife's house and his wife's flagpole. The reporting says the flag was up for days, and the explanation, frankly, makes no sense at all. The explanation is a neighbor said something offensive, and now there's some reporting that there was a personal confrontation, perhaps. But a lot of people say offensive things to me. I've been through a lot of personal confrontations, for example, in these Trump years. But at no point have anyone said, well, you know what we should do in response to this personal confrontation? Fly an extremist flag that I don't believe. That doesn't make any sense. Why would this happen? Why would it stay up for days? Why would a Supreme Court justice allow it to stay up for days, even if it is only his wife's actions? There's just no excuse for this. At some point when you read some of these defenses, you know if the same facts were occurring, say, at Justice Sotomayor's house or at Justice Kagan's house, these people would be all over it for good reason, because it would be inexcusable. The defenses of Alito here just don't make much sense. It was a dreadful, dreadful mistake for this to happen.
And it comes at a time, Ashley, when among institutions that are not respected, Congress, politicians, the news media, the Supreme Court is having its lowest approval ratings because of perceived politics by the court.
That's right, and understandably so. As David mentioned, there was the Ginny and Clarence Thomas stories and issues, which worth noting. The coverage of that won a Pulitzer in public service this year from ProPublica. There's this new great reporting by The Times about Justice Alito. And then it really started in the Trump administration when the then president would talk about the justice he appointed as my justices. That very much gives an appearance of politics.
And by the way, he had lists of people who were approved by, we know that the group that has been weighing in heavily on these nominees, Jeff, he is now challenging Joe Biden to do the same before the election, to start listing people that he would nominate. And we're getting into bringing the Supreme Court nominations into the election campaign in a way that would never have been imagined previously.
Well, and it's clever on the former president's side because it made such a difference for him. I mean, I think in 2016 there were probably people on the right who may have held their nose to vote for President Trump because they knew that he had made promises about the Supreme Court, and then he delivered on those promises, and those people are still with him. The question is, will that have an impact for Democrats as well?
And it's all people that Leonard Leo had pre-selected for him.
Exactly.
Jeff Mason, thank you. Ashley Parker, David French, always good to see you. Thank you very much for coming.